Good morning. Good morning. How y'all doing?
Good.
Pretty good. Good morning.
Nice. So today we have Tamara with us. Another teacher in the zoo alongside me. So good morning, Tamara.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Yep.
Good
And of,
morning.
and of course, Pizzle. We wanted to get some non-game seven insight about this topic today, on top of what we think personally. But welcome to another team meeting where our mission is to distract you from your current story, dismantle your current belief systems, and inspire you to change your mind, which will then inspire you to change your life. So, it's been a couple of weeks because we've been back at work, but we still here. All of the places you can find us: Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Game 7 Shop, get your Game 7 apparel. We appreciate the follows and the likes, but our mission is to serve. So whenever you see us, please hit that share button. So, what's the focus for today? The focus for today is the school to prison pipeline. Because as stated, we've been back to work now, good 6 weeks, month and a half or so. Um, and it's been a year. It's been a year, right? And
Right.
some things have happened that made this come to mind, especially this week. So this week, I was actually walking outside to meet KP during my lunch break, and a school decision maker found me in the hallway. He's like, "Yo, can I talk to you real quick?" I'm like, "Yeah, come on. I'm going for a walk, but you can walk with me." So we're walking, and all in all, he or she says that. So the word amongst the educators is that Mr. Malcolm wants to punish and suspend all the kids. So I'm like, "All right, cool, fair." And I was like, "Nah, I just want to hold them accountable, like life will." And also, me and those educators that you're referring to are here for different reasons, right? And we got a lot of time to get into it. But all in all, in school now, public education, I should say, um, the students can basically do what they want, like like literally. There's no such thing as a zero anymore. They don't have due dates anymore. Um, it's very, very, very hard for them to get in trouble. Yelling, cussing, fighting, inappropriate touching, um, basically all of the things that you're not supposed to do in school, more or less they can kind of do. And it makes it hard to actually teach, and it makes it hard for these children who are doing these kind of things to learn the core character skills that they need first before they can even learn. And it also takes away from the mass of students who show up to school and learn, because there's so many distractions that they have to face, the educators have to face, and the administrators have to face for those kids to really learn, right? But also, like, speaking for myself, I teach for a different reason than most people, right? And today we're going to talk about the school to prison pipeline. And here is what do they call it? An excerpt from a letter that Joe wrote to me on July 17th, 2019. Joe was, and I guess still is, my best friend, even though he's been locked up now, 2019, 15, 16 years, right? And that picture, um, one of the only pictures I can show, because he doesn't let me show any pictures of him in a jail uniform, right? So like this is one of the last ones. But this was our 8th grade graduation, where he didn't graduate and I was the president and I said the graduation speech, all those kind of things. But that was after at the cookout. And I know clothes outfits are overrated, but that picture is the definition of the two different ways that we went. Not in our relationship. That's never nothing has ever been wrong with that. But the two different directions that we went in our life, right? But this was a response to when I had first told him that we were starting game 7. He said, "I'm just so mentally drained with all of this jail shit. I'm ready to go to a program to help me get ready for the outside, to teach me some skills that's going to assist me on my journey to the other side. I'm happy to hear that UNT still going hard. It's beautiful. Nas is getting big, bro. Make sure you keep him focused how you used to be. You always had your head on straight. It was guys like me that couldn't get it together. You have always been somebody I looked at for positive energy. That's why I said what I said to you that day at the courts. I wanted better for you than hanging with me. Look at me now, begging this court to give me relief after 13 years in prison. Things is rough on this side of that prison wall. Keep coaching those kids in life, Mount, because they will never forget the effect you have on them. Positive role models is something that the youth is missing, especially our black men. I'm proud of all of the things that you're doing, bro. I respect you big time. So as we're talking today about the school to prison pipeline, um, like I know everybody has their own life experiences, but I've literally seen it. Like when I went to school, to boarding school, he went to prison. Like, and primarily because our what we did in school and what was happening to us outside of school was different. And it was primarily decisions. Like for a lot of that time, we lived in like the same house. We didn't have the same parents, obviously. And our life before we met was a little bit different. But I know what it's like. That's the high school level. And then Pizzle, somebody else that shall remain nameless, but we also know what it's like at the college level to have friends who had every opportunity to go the other way. And now they're in prison as well. Right. So I just wanted to put that out there before we start. So an overview of the school to prison pipeline. This is not something that I'm making up. This is an actual thing. And most of this research today is from a doctor named Dr. Cole from a study of understanding the school to prison pipeline. And there's some other sources that I got at the bottom that come up later. But the school to prison pipeline is a process through which students are pushed out of schools and into prisons. In other words, it is a process of criminalizing youth that is carried out by disciplinary policies and practices within schools that put students into contact with law enforcement. Once they are put into contact with law enforcement for disciplinary reasons, many are then pushed out of the educational environment and into the juvenile justice system. Next, um, sorry. The key policies and practices that created and now maintain the school to prison pipeline include zero tolerance policies that mandate harsh punishments for both minor and major infractions, exclusion of students from schools through punitive suspensions and expulsions, and the presence of police on campus as school resource officers, which are called SROs. The school to prison pipeline is supported by budgetary decisions made by the government. From 1987 to 2007, funding for incarceration more than doubled, while funding for higher education was raised by just 21%. Right, so that's like a times 20 difference, right? So 20 times as much has been spent on prison and incarceration, and 20 times less was spent on education, according to PBS. In addition, the evidence shows that the school to prison pipeline primarily captures and affects Black students, which mirrors the overrepresentation of this group in America's prisons and jails. Jail is like junior prison, is where you go before you get sentenced or you have some kind of light sentence. And prison is where you go after you get sentenced or you have some kind of more significant sentence. So, zero tolerance. The two key forces that produce and now maintain the school to prison pipeline are the use of zero tolerance policies that mandate exclusionary punishments and the presence of SROs, the police officers, on campus. The policies and practices became common following a deadly spate of school shootings across the U.S. in the 90s. Lawmakers and educators believe that they will help to ensure safety on school campuses. Now, I feel like until this year, there's never been a school shooting at a predominantly Black school. But the school to prison pipeline mostly affects Black students.
Right.
My thoughts. Research shows that the implementation of zero tolerance policies has led to significant increases in suspensions and expulsions. Once suspended or expelled, data show that students are less likely to complete high school and more than twice as likely to be arrested while on forced leave from school, and more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system during the year that follows that leave. In fact, sociologist David Ramey found in a nationally representative study that experiencing school punishment before the age of 15 is associated with the contact of the criminal justice system for boys. Other research shows that students who do not complete high school are more likely to be locked up. All right, so we got zero tolerance, and then we have school resource officers. Most schools across the country now have police present on campus on a daily basis, and most states require educators to report student misbehaviors to law enforcement. The presence of SROs on campus means that students have contact with law enforcement from a young age. Though their intended purpose is to protect students and ensure safety on school campuses, in many instances, the police handling of disciplinary issues escalates minor nonviolent infractions into violent criminal incidents that have negative impacts on students. And I say now that they don't have any rules, now you kind of need police because they can push the limits so high. Before, when we had rules, we would stop a lot of these things before police was necessary. That's my personal opinion. Criminologist Emily Owens found that the presence of SROs on campus causes law enforcement agencies to learn of more crimes and increases the likelihood of arrest for those crimes among children under the age of 15. The increased use of zero tolerance policies in police in the schools has exponentially increased arrests and referrals to the juvenile courts. Once they have made contact with the criminal justice system, data shows that students are unlikely to graduate high school. What over a decade of empirical research on this topic proves is that zero tolerance policies, punitive disciplinary measures like suspensions and expulsions, and the presence of SROs on campus have led to more students being pushed out of schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice system. In short, these policies and practices created the school to prison pipeline, and they sustain it today. Next, exclusion from school, enrollment, and crime. The sociologist's concept of socialization also helps shed the light on why the school to prison pipeline exists. After family, after family, after family, after family, school is the second most important and formative site of socialization for children and adolescents where they learn social norms and behavior and interaction and receive moral guidance from authority figures. Removing students from school as a form of discipline takes them out of this formative environment and important process, and it removes them from the safety and structure that the school provides. Many students who express behavioral issues at school are acting out in response to stressful or dangerous conditions in their homes or neighborhoods. So removing them from school and returning them to a problematic or unsupervised home environment hurts rather than helps their development. This part is kind of true, but that doesn't mean that there are things that can be done to combat this. Like Joe said, he told me at the course, he didn't want me doing the things that he was doing outside of school. While removed from school during a suspension or expulsion, youth are more likely to spend time with others removed for similar reasons and with those who are already engaged in criminal activity. Rather than being socialized by education-focused peers and educators, students have been suspended or expelled will be socialized more by peers in similar situations. Because of these factors, the punishment of removal from school creates the conditions for the development of criminal behavior. Once excluded from school and labeled bad or criminal, students often find themselves stigmatized by their teachers, parents of friends, and other community members. They experience confusion, stress, depression, and anger as a result of being excluded from school and from being treated harshly and unfairly by those in charge. This makes it difficult to stay focused on school and hinders motivation to study and desire to return to school and to succeed academically. Cumulatively, these social forces work to discourage academic studies, hinder academic achievement, and even completion of high school, and push negatively labeled youth onto criminal paths and into the criminal justice system. So basically, there's nowhere for them to go when they get suspended, so they hit the streets and they become a part of the streets, according to the school to prison pipeline data. Black students. While black people are just 13% of the total U.S. population, they comprise the greatest percentage of people in prison, 40%. Hispanics are also overrepresented in prisons and jails, but by far less. They comprise 16% of the U.S. population and represent 19% of those in prison and jail. White people make up just about 40% of the incarcerated population, but they make up 64% of the American population. Data from across the U.S. illustrates punishment and school-related arrests show that racial disparity of incarceration begins within the school to prison pipeline. Research shows that both schools with large Black populations and underfunded schools, many of which are majority minority schools, are more likely to employ zero tolerance policies. Nationwide, Blacks and Hispanic students face far greater rates of suspension and expulsions than do white students. In addition, data compiled by the National Center for Education and Statistics show that while the percentage of white students suspended fell from 99 to 2007, the percentage for Blacks and Hispanics rose. A variety of studies and metrics show that Black and Indigenous students are punished far more frequently and more harshly for the same, mostly minor offenses than our white students. Legal and educational scholar Daniel Lewson points out that though there is no evidence that these students misbehave more frequently or more severely than do white students, research from across the country shows that teachers and admin punish them more, especially Black students. Lewson cites that one study found that the disparity is greatest among non-serious offenses like cell phone use, violations of dress code, and subjectively defined offenses like being disruptive or displaying affection. Black first-time offenders in these categories are suspended at rates that are more than double of white first-time offenders. Almost done. According to the U.S. Department of Education for Civil Rights, about 5% of white students have been suspended during schooling, compared to 16% of Black students. This means that Black students are more than 3 times as likely to be suspended than their white peers, though they comprise just about 16% of the total enrollment in public school students. Black students comprise 32% of in-school suspensions, 33% out-of-school suspensions. This disparity begins as early as preschool. Nearly half of all preschool students suspended are Black, though they represent just 18% of the total preschool enrollment. Hispanic students also face inflated suspension rates. They represent 2% of out-of-school suspensions, which is 4 times greater than the percentage of total enrolled students that they comprise. Black students are also more likely to experience multiple suspensions. Though they are just 16% of enrollment, they are a full 42% of those suspended multiple times. This means that their presence in the population of students with multiple suspensions is more than 2.6 times greater than the presence of total population of students. Meanwhile, white students are underrepresented among those with multiple suspensions at just 31%. These disparate rates play out not only within schools, but also across districts on the basis of race. Data shows that in the Midlands area of South Carolina, suspension figures in the mostly Black school districts are double than that of whites. And they say this is way, way worse down south than it is up north. Students with disabilities are even more likely to experience exclusionary discipline, with the exception of Asian and Latinx students. Research shows that more than 1 out of 4 boys of color with disabilities and nearly 1 in 5 girls of color with disabilities receive out-of-school suspension. Meanwhile, research shows that white students who express behavioral issues in schools are more likely to be treated with medication, which reduces their chances of ending up in jail or prison acting out in school. All right, so how do schools respond? So one law that I know about in the DMV is called Chapter 25. So in 2018, the Student Fair Access to School Act in DC places restrictions on the number of consecutive and cumulative days and any out-of-school suspension that students can receive. So K through 5, they can get suspended for 5 days. 6 to 12, 10 days at the maximum. Students in all of K through 12 cannot be suspended for more than 20 days unless the chancellor provides a written justification to the student and the parent describing why exceeding this 20-day limit is appropriate, right? So you need approval from the chancellor. The exception to the above requirements if a student violates the Gun-Free Schools Act. This federal law requires all schools to expel a student who is determined to have brought a firearm to school or have possessed a firearm at school from attending school for a period of not less than a year. However, the chancellor can modify the expulsion requirement. I know a student who brought a gun to school. He wasn't expelled because he bought it by accident. Right? Not saying that he should be, but We got this whole rule right here, but at the end, the chancellor can modify anything. All right. And KP, let me know if Just get on because I can't see.
Word. Yeah, I don't. He didn't say anything in the comments or anything, so not
All
sure.
right. So more about chapter 25. So schools, I changed that myself to because it doesn't say schools, it said something else. Schools is committed to helping students. Yo.
Just his own.
All right. Let me let them know. All right, cool. Schools is committed to helping students learn the expectations and rules for appropriate school behavior and a range of disciplinary responses for inappropriate or disruptive behavior. Schools will recognize and encourage students who exhibit appropriate non-disruptive behavior. Schools will encourage prevention and intervention strategies to prevent inappropriate behavior. To that end, all available resources, subject to budgetary limitations, shall be utilized, including preventative and responsive interventions that support students' needs. So basically, when students get in trouble, we don't want to suspend them, we want to give them resources. But that's all according to the budget. And we know that they spent 20 times as much money on prison as they do in education. And most of the budget goes to teachers and staff and such who are necessary, but there doesn't seem to usually be that much left to cater to these needs. And we know because that's a lot of the hurdles with Game 7 is school budgets, right? And approval and XYZ. When a student's behavior disrupts the community's safe learning environment, schools will use a range of disciplinary responses intended to change and manage inappropriate behavior. In administering disciplinary responses, schools will work with students to correct inappropriate behavior. Students will be enabled and encouraged to reflect on their actions, to learn from mistakes, and to restore any relationships that have been negatively impacted. So when students disrupt the learning environment, we're going to teach them about their behavior and we're going to repair relationships. That's what's supposed to happen instead of suspending them. So according to how much money we have, if a student causes trouble to the learning environment, we're going to remove them, teach them about their behaviors and how they're damaging relationships. Whenever it's possible, according to how much money we got, prevention, intervention, and remediation strategies shall be used in addition to disciplinary responses at all stages of the disciplinary process, including students transitioning from suspension or expulsion. Schools shall involve family members in efforts to determine the cause of misbehavior and effort to support appropriate school behavior. So, how should we respond to these students who cause issues to the learning environment and they should not be suspended? Here are some things that we should do if we have the money available. Anger management, I'm not going to read them all, but anger management, attendance, behaviors, things in the community, conflict resolution, crime awareness, counseling, individual counseling, group counseling, interventions, rehab programs, problem solving, all of these kinds of things that really do help people if there's a full commitment to it. Right? Almost done. I know this was a lot of jargon, but I wanted y'all to see how things are actually lined up. So not we, I'm using we as a general we don't suspend students anymore because if they get suspended, they don't get to learn. They're going to be home. They're going to be in the streets. They're going to be hanging around with criminals. So they're going to become criminals and they're going to go to jail because people at school are going to stop caring about them. They're going to be isolated. They're going to be depressed. They got to find love in the streets. So they're going to go to the streets and they're going to go to prison. So therefore, we're not going to suspend anybody. The maximum you can get suspended K through at 6 through 12. This is more so the area we're talking about is 10 days. But we can go to 20 for the year, but it has to be signed off by the chancellor who can do what he or she wants, right? So therefore, we're going to keep them in the building. But if these students cause any behavioral issues or any disruptions to the learning environment, here's what we do. That's what's on paper from the boards of education and the laws and such. But here's my opinion, and I'll let y'all share yours and we'll talk. So, my opinion, this is only me. The plan has backfired. Although the Black incarceration rate has dropped over the years, the learning environment is horrible because the kids who will usually be suspended, there's no accountability. I believe that they should be removed, but don't just put them in the streets. Like, give them somewhere to go. Give them this counseling. Give them this character development. Put them in alternative school where they really get an alternative education to where they learn coping skills. Or maybe their family's in poverty and maybe they got to do a half a day and they got to go to work. Or maybe they need childcare so they can go to a school that has childcare and they can teach them how to do things to be balanced as a student and a young lady or a man. Or maybe there's like a family school to where this person is not coming to school because things happen in their family. So maybe they're removed from the academic learning environment, but placed in like some kind of learning environment where they learn the things that they need. And this is the data to show that in about in 2019, it used to be 1 in 45 black men. No, now it's 1 in 45 black men who are incarcerated. It used to be 1 in 17. So the incarceration rate has dropped over recent times. But we are still by far the most incarcerated culture. Number 2, Malcolm's opinion. All students should have the right to learn, but many students do not get that due to the teachers having to put out fires all day instead of actually teaching. Students who disrupt the learning environment should be removed. Malcolm's opinion. Number 3, Malcolm's opinion. When students are removed from the learning environment, they should be placed in another learning environment where the curriculum caters to the kid, the person, not the student. Funding for these areas should be increased exponentially. Malcolm's opinion. So get them out of the regular learning environment, but don't just send them home. Like send them to the character building school, or maybe they need to go see the youth prison for a week, or maybe they need to learn how to make money or coping skills or something. But put them in a learning environment to where they can actually learn. Like Joe said, he's 33 now, still trying to learn skills that he was never taught, so he can come out and be a regular person and not go back. 4, Malcolm's opinion. As parents, specifically black ones, we got to do a better job raising our children. So many times kids give us trouble, then I meet the parent and I get it. I get it. And lastly, there seems to be a class of cultures amongst educators. I know a lot of the people that I know that do complain and speak up about the behaviors are black, right? Because we know what happens to us when we're not held accountable, right? It's not the same as other people. And a lot of the people who take the complaining about the behaviors as negative, and that we should cater to these behaviors by giving them cookies and donuts, pizza parties, and paper money, that they're not black. So I think there's definitely a class of cultures, right? So I've been rapping, but I wanted to share like what's legally on paper, what happens in schools and their responses. But all of that is up to one person, usually, in my opinion. So let's go. Let's go. Tamara, just Pizzle. Just any thoughts you had, anything that sticks out. Tamara, we usually do 2 rounds. We kind of just get everybody's thoughts out, and then we'll go back to respond to anything that came up when everybody shared. So Tamara, just Pizzle.
Well, of course, I have some opinions on this. I think the initial thought process, I guess the governments or the powers that be, I think the thought process was correct. I can see why they were trying to kind of shift the prison to the school to prison pipeline, but it has clearly since fizzled because, as you're saying, they haven't really provided us with the amount of monetary resources to really help the students. When I worked in Brooklyn, the children would get suspended, but they wouldn't get suspended and be sent home. They would get suspended and be sent to another school in the neighborhood. Now, that was done to ensure that the learning continued for the kids. So if I taught 5th grade for a number of years, if a 5th grade student was suspended from my class, they went to a 5th grade class literally in the school down the block. So and they continued their education. It became a deterrent because where I worked in Brooklyn, I was in the middle of the projects. So my school is on one side of the projects. if I happen to send a fifth grader to another school on the other end of the projects that my student has beef with, that's a problem. Because they're gonna go there by themselves and they don't want to be there. You know, we would literally have parents that would come to the school like, please, like, can you keep my kid in school? Please don't send them to this school because you know there's going to be issues. So, if it eventually it did become a deterrent, and that was without having to utilize necessary resources like restorative justice or putting the children in alternative schools or what have you. But we absolutely need to hold our children accountable for the behaviors that they demonstrate. And I understand it doesn't make sense to suspend children and put them outside and they're gonna end up being in the street or just home doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But we really need to teach them. So if we're gonna send kids, suspend them, or whether we suspend them to another school that they don't want to go to, they at least learn, okay, when I do this behavior, this is what's going to happen to me. And I think that's what has gone wrong with this. The kids now know that I can do whatever and nothing's going to happen. Or if I get suspended, okay, I want to be suspended anyway. I don't want to be here anyway. So I can be at home, or I could, my mom or my grandma has to go to work, so I'm gonna be out in the street. That's where the ball has dropped. We're failing our children because we're not providing them an alternative. Clearly the children are acting in a way that is undesirable, but this is the only way that they know how to act, if you will. And we really need to teach them that. I don't know if alternative schools would necessarily be the best thing, just because based on the whole IDEA, children have to be, educated in an exclusionary situation where all kids are included. Having an alternative school will exclude kids, but I definitely think it makes sense to, if a child is suspended, okay, for these 2 days, you're required to go to this therapy or restorative session. You know what I mean? You and your parent, so you can learn A, B, C, and D. For the 2 days that you're suspended, you should go to the jail. Spend a few hours, speak to the people in there, the 16-year-olds that are there, so you can hear how much they want to come home, for the behaviors that they've done. So we absolutely need to hold our children accountable. That's the only way that they learn. That's why they're children. They're gonna learn. But I'm not sure how, to kind of implore the government agencies to enforce this, because a lot of these people making these laws or these rules or mandates haven't been to school since going to school, so they don't even realize, it almost doesn't affect them. These are kids that they'll never have to come in contact with. So although the thought and idea, I think, made sense initially, we weren't provided in the school setting with the resources and the monies to really, really ensure that kids are not being suspended. Yeah.
Thank you, man. Well said. Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing. Um, I wanted to pick up where you left off. Essentially, you were highlighting the fact that, um, unfortunately, policies are not created by educators who have on-site experience, or if they do, it's been limited, or it's not timely anymore. Okay, so if you've had an opportunity to be an on-site administrator or teacher or instructional coach, master educator when that was a position, right? But the last time you were in schools, 90s, early 2000s, you're going to have a very, very tough time making decisions that are accurate for today's climate. Okay. The culture amongst children are very, very different. Um, the reality of what drives their behavior is very, very different, including different, influences such as social media. Um, the norm of parenting looks completely different. So the reality of you making policies that are based on your past experience are now limited, and you provide a limited perspective. So I think that that's one huge gap that exists in many school districts where these policies are being created. Also, I wanted to share that off-task behaviors in students highlight their lack of engagement. Okay, so when students are off task, it's because there's nothing that is connecting them to the content, the projects, or the work that's being presented to them, and that is usually the first flag to identify, right? So there's a norm in education where educators will spend time outside of school in evenings over the summer, and they create curriculum, they create uh, they create plans, they purchase a number of different educational platforms to support students, and they don't ask the input of the student, right? So now you've done all this planning, you spent all this money to serve people, and you've never got their input. And then you struggle to create policies to support them and meet their needs, yet you've never heard their direct voice, ask them what they need or what direction they would like to head in. And then we wonder why the efforts are being unmet, or our efforts are not being received. So I think there's just a historical norm of doing things for people that you think are best for them without their input. And I think this generation of young people is beginning to highlight the weakness in that approach, to be honest. Um, Also, I think it's really important for not just people, not just parents, but also educators to really, really understand what childhood development looks like, right? Because there are some behaviors that are completely developmentally appropriate, right? Um, Middle school is a very, very special place. Of course, we know what to expect, generically from elementary students, but there's huge developmental gains between a kindergartner and a fifth grader, right? But then there are certain things that are developmentally appropriate behavior wise from middle schoolers, right? Who are beginning to identify themselves and, trying to find their individuality. And it's important for them to push against the line. It's important for them to, um, what is the word? Essentially test boundaries, right? That is the role and responsibility of a middle-aged young person. Now, for adults who don't understand that, they continue to take that as threat. They continue to take it as disrespect, and their lens that they see that behavior through is what dictates how they respond. Once again, the lens that they see that behavior through dictates how they respond. So if they don't see it as something appropriate, they take it as behavior that is disruptive, um, off task, disrespectful, and then they respond accordingly. For me, my offer would be to teach children self direction, right? Many young people, despite the curriculum or despite the school culture that they're a part of, or that is the norm of that educational community that they're a part of, there are still students that find ways to be successful, right? So it's not necessarily a exposure that, hey, the curriculum is not effective. Yes, it may not be effective to meet all the needs of students because we haven't included students in the process. But I think the students that have been taught self-direction, either at home or earlier in their educational career, find a way still to be successful in that environment, right? While the class may be out of control, they're the kid in the back room, in the back of the room or the side of the room, sitting in their desk reading a book, right? They've already identified what their focus is. They're given resources, or they're given different things that they need to be able to fulfill that need, and they are on that mission, themselves to be able to achieve that need. So I think that that's another aspect. My last two points are that learning begins at home. Okay, learning begins at home. The very first teachers, the very first educators are parents, people. Okay, and unfortunately, this is not an urban reality. This is an American culture reality at this point, that parents have struggled to prepare their students to learn, and parents have struggled to prepare their students to be in the space to receive learning and education, right? In order to teach someone, they have to have certain skills to be able to receive that information, be coached, and then apply it, right? There is a system of like readiness that is important for young people to have, and many aspects of that level of readiness come from what you are taught at home, right? Essentially teaching your child to be coachable. And unfortunately, whether there is not enough emphasis on this responsibility, or it's a lack of know-how, right? So we're basically having a conversation about parents having either a skill or will issue at this point in society, okay? For me, I personally believe that it is a skill issue. I don't believe that any parent would purposely send their child out into the world or into school without the ability to take full advantage of what's being offered at school, because most parents are not educators and that's not their expertise. So they see value in sending their child to school. Ideally, they will want them to receive and benefit from all the resources that are being shared at school. But unfortunately, they don't know how, and have a skill development issue on preparing their student to take full advantage. Don't get me wrong, there are some parents that have that role, have that ability, and maybe they're pulled in so many different directions. They're working 2 to 3 jobs. They're struggling themselves mentally, emotionally. They have certain instabilities in their life, and then that becomes more of a will conversation. But I personally believe that skill is the biggest barrier there. And then the last part I wanted to highlight is, yes, there are lots and lots and lots of resources that flow through urban school districts. Okay, lots of money in comparison to other school districts. I have an opportunity to support school leaders and district leaders around the country now, and there's a huge imbalance in money and resources that flow into urban communities versus those school communities that don't support urban and families that are in low socioeconomic statuses. And the reality is, even if you have a lot of money flowing into your budgets, into your overall district, if the money's not allocated properly, you will still get what you pay for. You will still get what you pay for, right? So if you are putting, if your principal is making $180,000, your assistant principal is making $140,000, $125,000. Now these are numbers that I know exist. Like I've seen myself on budget sheets. Okay. These are 2 highly paid professionals that these numbers are probably surprising to some people, that people can make money like that in the education industry, right? Because historically they're low paid professionals, right? But people are making money. Where the money is spent in school districts is for professionals who lead instruction. Most times, if you are a professional, and if you're a professional educator and your expertise is in instruction, there is a lack in establishing school culture and addressing the needs of school behavior or childhood behavior. that's not the lens that they've necessarily built a skill in. It's not a skill versus will conversation for instructional leaders. We know what their skill set is. The skill set is instruction. However, when you go to hire a dean of students, you go to hire a assistant principal of intervention, all of the other myriad of titles that kind of come with it. Now you're maxing those people out at what? $100,000, $105,000. Yet your entire school culture is terrible. More than likely they're averaging 10,000 steps before lunch. How do I know that number? I've been that individual, right? They're processing calls about what has happened in school, what's happening in the neighborhood. You're meeting with different people around the community. There's collaboratives that are supporting you all at your school with reestablishing or trying to establish a safe space for students to be. And unfortunately, this person is not valued as much monetarily by the overall school district, which also, highlights the individual that you're going to get to be in that position. And if there is someone that is even in that position that has, multiple degrees or has a huge, a strong background in childhood development or understands the norms of childhood development and what behaviors kind of follow that, and can create systems that support people, both families, educators, and the student, because those are very, very different audiences. You're looking for an individual to be successful in those lanes, but you're not paying for the individual. You don't have the right price tag to be able to demand the individual that can do that for a long time, and then also provide him with the supports, including personnel, that can support that wave of work that's necessary. So I hope I was able to highlight some realities, right? I hope I was able to highlight some potential next steps for both individuals that support students directly in schools, and then also parents. And then I hope I was also to ultimately highlight the fact that it's a collective opportunity for all stakeholders involved to identify what the best course of action is for, whether it's your own student, your own school community that you're part of, or just even the overall educational landscape right now, because we continue to identify that there's gaps. But as we realize some of these realities that are going on now that, we're still in the midst of COVID, but now that schools have begun to operate more kind of in a normal space where students are back in the building, many of the things that we've complained about, they've come back with a heightened sense of reality since COVID. And I think it's more so action time than it is about identifying issues now at this point, right? Any action is better than lack of action, because as long as we can analyze throughout the process or progress monitor, we can make adjustments that we need to make. It's just that idolization that's really, really making us, have an inability to win the battle right now.
All great points. Coming from a different, I guess, perspective, because I haven't been in the classroom, I haven't been in front of children. But just coming from my own perspective of growing up, I think suspensions are definitely necessary. Like when I was in school, if kids got in a fight, it was 5 days. If kids got in a crazy fight, it was 7 days. And then, if you messed up again, see you later. Thank you very much. Have a good one. It's up to your parents to figure out where you'll get your education at from there. But I definitely, as much as I want to push that, I do realize that kids need the resources to be able to stay busy, right? They always say an idle mind makes the devil's playground. So when you think about a child who's not immersed in the classroom or actually in front of a teacher learning, it's like, what are they doing, right? Are they on the street? What resources are available? And I always find it to be funny. And I think because you guys are always in class throughout the day. So in my particular position, I get a chance and I travel around to all 113 schools. But I get a chance to really ride around the city. And it's always amazing to see how many kids are just out and about walking around the sidewalk. You go to Chinatown and it's like Yo, is there a field trip? Is there a field trip to Chipotle? What's going on, yo? But it's just that, there's so many different children who don't necessarily have the places or the resources to go to once they're in trouble at that school. I think that's kind of like frightening. What to do to combat that, to kind of make sure that increases, I don't know. I know that we've been trying to develop many different ways, and I know they got like different alternative schools, there's other programming, but I think that there needs to be more of a focus on providing a budget where maybe, if we need to increase it and have 30 programs in each school, that's just what we got to do, right? Like, look at the government, they give out millions and millions and millions of dollars to schools, but it gets allocated towards different things versus being allocated towards the resources that will really help these kids in this particular population. So I think it's very important to make sure that the kids have the available resources for when they're suspended, so that that way they're able to, I guess, still stay engaged within school and not just be completely left out to the streets. And then also, I think it's also like exposure, right? When I think about high school, when I was in there, I think it was my junior year, they took us, it was one particular teacher and every kid had to do it, but they took us to a jail. And I'll never forget it, right? They put you in a jail and you're sitting there like, at first it was cool, right? All the homies got long white tees on, we talking about jail, all that. But then when you actually get inside of a cell and you're like, this is dirty. Like, this is now, like, people live like this, right? Or they showed us like a room where all the inmates were at. It was eye-opening, right? To the point where I'm 32 now and I can still remember how it felt to be in there. So I think it's very important to expose those children to environments like that. Like, have a program, kids do a field trip to the DC jail. Let's go ahead and spend 2 hours up there, talk on the phone or something to somebody, on the little screen they got, and just have that exposure. And I guarantee you some things will stick. Now, naturally, you may have kids who gravitate towards that, right? Because you expose them to that. And I think that, you look at the DARE program, that's a perfect example of it. But I think that you will have some students who are able to change their lives after being exposed to something like that and will want more for themselves and not go down that actual path. So I think more exposure to the realities of what will happen if you continue down these paths, and just more programs or like alternate schools, and just being able to provide a place of refuge for the kids when they are suspended or when they get in trouble. Those would be my 2 suggestions.
Good points, Pizzle. As y'all was talking, I took some notes. So first, number one, that was a good point about the salaries for the deans and such, right? Because like just last year, this summer, I had an offer for another position that would be way better for me, like just fitting my skills, doing social emotional learning at a high school in the city. But the cap, it was an administrative position, but the cap on that position is less than what I make now. And I wouldn't get my summer off. I would have to work until like 5:30 instead of 3:30. Like it just wasn't worth it, And that would have been, knowing that school, like outside of the principal, that probably would have been the most influential role in the building. Especially like every school I go to, I somehow end up being the voice of the streets, meaning like the voice of the students, right? Everybody just gravitates towards me for whatever reason. So that's a great point. One that I tied to that is that most of the relatable Black staff members in the buildings are usually on the disciplinary team, right? And they usually don't have the formal education to be put in a position of true influence in the building. So usually most of the people that they see that look like them, talk like them, that they know that live in the city are the ones that get them in trouble. It's rare, and like this is a national thing, but it's rare that we have relatable people in positions of influence. That's my personal opinion. Like we have a lot of Black peoples, not naturally, but in the DMV, but I feel like most of them that can truly relate are in not positions of influence. So it's like a lack of pay for the people who are qualified, and the people that they do have in those positions are usually high school graduates, which is fine. Like that doesn't limit them. But when we talk about education, that's a correlation of influence in the building.
It's me or he froze.
He's from.
Yeah, I think he froze. I can never tell if it's my own internet. Let me text him. Yeah, he said his internet tripped out. Should be on.
No, I think it's been an interesting conversation though. It's so funny to be able to see school from a different lens now that I'm not in the school building.
Mm-hmm.
You really do realize that while you're in the school building. So once you leave school, you realize how much other people outside of the school building have control of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's an unfortunate reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I get a chance to have like personal conversations with these people that are in positions to have this power,
Mm-hmm.
and their context is completely off sometimes. Like great intentions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great intentions. It's just not really understanding the reality, and the reality is, how could you understand, right? Some of this stuff is cultural competence,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And some aspects of cultural competence can't be taught; they have to be experienced, right?
Yep.
I could tell you what it's like waking up on Saturday morning and getting rushed out your bed because that's the cleaning day, and I can tell you what's on the radio, and I could tell you that it smelled like Fabuloso, but until you've been there, like you don't really understand what the mix of cleaning products and breakfast smell like.
Exactly.
With the music, and then just I don't know. I think there is a huge disparity though, unfortunately, in like what we expect from our children. Like the stakes are so much higher when you grow up as a black and brown child in America. Like you have to get it right now. There's no like opportunity for learning, right? Or for exploring. It's like, hey, you have to be on the expectations that you're on task all the time, that your behavior is, right, or it's aligned, right? And it can't be controversial at any point, because if not, your stakes are so much higher, right? Whereas, unfortunately, if you don't have that paint job, skin color, certain environment, your opportunities to learn naturally, or for your development to kind of happen a little bit more organically, is allowed with less stakes, right? And then now that person has like more long-lasting learnings because they weren't stressed out so much during the
process.
You feel me? So even just having a conversation saying, oh yeah, like we were taking. Yeah.
They messing with us because of the topic. We never had no technical issues, bro.
Yeah.
That's a great point though, Justin.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, just even saying, like, there's a norm of like black and brown kids going to a jail to see what that's like. That's almost like planting the seed, like, hey, this is a potential outcome for you, right? I don't think young people who have like self-direction, have clear goals set for themselves, they have adults helping them achieve at the building blocks of those, or the incremental goals that it's going to take to actually reach that overarching goal. I don't think that the conversation even has a place about prison, because the goal, the vision is somewhere else.
Right.
I do think, and we didn't really cover this topic, but I think there's a huge missed opportunity in offering young people trades in school, and then also offering opportunities on how to successfully build like a career out of social media or some type of technical, like some kind of technology opportunity. All right. We see the direction of like all of the industries that are changing, and we're still teaching our kids like on the 1940s model. Like, no wonder why they're not engaged. Just because you use Nearpod don't mean that I'm like paying attention to the slides being changed. It's still like slides. Like, you feel me?
Irrelevant information.
Yeah, and they recognize that. They just don't have the voice to be able to share it. We also recognize it because as we're planning this lesson, or we see the slides that our district has given us. Like, man, this is some crap. We know it, and there's only so much faking that you can do. Yep, great highlights, Portia. But you know, it's funny because the autonomy that educators are given in areas that are outside of urban areas are completely different, right? So just their ability to be able to provide like just in time supports, kind of what you would call it, right? Like right at that moment, what's necessary for my student in this moment to move them where we believe they need to be. That autonomy is given to an educator, whereas there's more of like a scripted plan. You have your scoping sequences for the year. You have your curriculum. That's what you're held to, regardless of what your students present. So I think, you know, as long as we operate within that system or within that approach, we'll continue to get the same results. Because I mean, if any, you know, if we do want to be honest, if we have a consistent outcome of anything, that means the system is working how it was designed to work because it continues to produce the same product. It may not be the one that you believe it should produce or the one that you've been told that it should produce, but clearly that system has very, very clear inputs in order to create the output that it's creating. So
Yeah, let's offer some potential, I guess, obviously, potential solutions to the problem from the things that we can control as educators and students on the other side. So I'll say that although that there are all these things being done to deter the school to prison pipeline, over the years they spent 20 times as much on prisons as they've done on schools. And I believe that these behaviors that are now happening in schools because of Chapter 25 and such are going to be behaviors that put even more of these kids into prison because they're not getting taught the things that they need, like in the corporate world, the regular world, family world, nothing. They're going to have very, very difficult lives as they after they get out of school. So I think just like everything else, especially as a black man, woman, boy, or girl in this country, you have to adjust to the way things are until things change, right? So the thing that we can do is to control what we can control. I saw Portia put a comment earlier, and speaking from my personal uh, uh, experience, I've taught way more black kids than any kind of other kids, Hispanics, white kids, anything else. But by far, the white parents are the most involved, from my experience, and there's way less of them that I've taught. Black parents overall are not really involved at all unless they're responding to a call about behavior. But I think the more noise that we make, and I'm not talking all that protest stuff. I'm talking about show up to the Board of Education meetings with a plan. Well, the data says that the African American community that we're doing math on the third grade level at grade 7. So here's my proposal about an intervention program to get our math students to catch up to grade level. Boom, and then actually follow through on that. Or the data says XYZ XYZ. So become a part of the process and don't just respond to phone calls home about behaviors, but let's learn. Like Jess always says, learn the rules and play the game. Um, and once parents do become involved, like especially in this city, I don't think there's any reason that any student should have not straight A's. Like literally, like it's unlimited makeup work, it's unlimited extra credit. You don't have to do it on time. Like let's run the system so we can get into these colleges and certification programs, XYZ. And the better that we do according to their system, the more things that we will get. So number one, like starting at home, I know it sounds basic, but just teach your kids how to respect one another and respect adults. I think that's something that's kind of going. So I say control we can control, like Board of Education wise, get involved, don't just react to behaviors. And teach your kids how to respect one another, and we can go from there. Because the number one issue is just a lack of respect for self, for peers,
And so,
and for educators. So
mhm.
that's my potential solution. Let's go down the line. Tamara, KP, Just.
I think it would be helpful, just like we were saying, when these children are suspended, if we can have a Gate 7 where they can go to, but not just the children, the parents, or whoever the guardians are. A lot of our kids are not with their parents, but whoever the guardians are, whether it's even down to a foster parent, for these 2 days you're gonna have to be inconvenienced. And a lot of people are gonna push back and well, I can't take off of work and blah blah blah. Then we can go back to the whole your kid can't come back. Your kid can't come back to the school. um like I said, I realize when we inconvenience the parent, then that's when we can begin to see some sort of a change. And again, it's not just suspending them so they're home and mommy goes to work and then they're home doing whatever. But for these 2-3 days, you guys are going to do this one day, this another day, and this, and this, every time you get suspended, this is what's going to happen. you know but I think that may be one way to kind of help the children, is to hold the parents accountable, because clearly we can't punish the parents, but we can hold them accountable. um and sometimes I've encountered parents that are like, look, I don't know what to do, don't call me. And that clearly is a parent that is struggling. So they would benefit from a resource, or a community organization that can help them raise their child or children, because they're at a loss. So I would implore us, I guess we're the educators, or we're in that field, um, to begin to kind of maybe develop these organizations, or push the people that are outside of the classroom of the schools that make these decisions, that this is going to be something better. So I'm putting it on us. We have to be able to do that as well. Otherwise, we're going to continue to loathe going into work every day, and that's no fun at all. So. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, to me, it's pretty easy. Just provide more programs and resources for these kids, and have more exposure for them to be able to recognize that this isn't the right pathway, or to kind of like help them out. I think, Tamara, you hit a great point when you said that you have to educate or train the parent, right? Because at the end of the day, the kid comes back home to the parent, and if the parent is inconvenienced, they're going to make sure that the kid is somewhat straight. You think about your own personal life. You got suspended. I know for myself, I got suspended. It's a wrap. Like, firstly, when I get home, Pop going to tap me. Then when I come home again, my mom going to tap me. Then grandma going to hit me. You know what I mean? It's multiple people in line that are going to be like, yo, what are you doing? Right? And multiple people that are very close to me, and that I may or may, most likely that I actually may listen to, compared to a lot of other folks. So I think that inconveniencing the parents or the guardian is the first step. And then just by providing those resources for the kids is the second step.
Yep, great point, KP. I'll also highlight the need for parent or adult education. I think it's also like important to understand the context that more than likely, if you're a parent of a high schooler right now, you were born in the 80s and raised by a parent who was a product of the 80s, right? And it's important to understand like the context that was going on during that time of Black communities. And if you happen to have a young child, you probably are, born in the 90s at this point. We know what Black communities look like in the 90s in America, specifically DC in the 80s and 90s. And there was no highlight or slew of resources flowing into the school system or school district at that point, right? So they're a product of that process, and unfortunately, what they're doing is teaching their children the best that they know that they've been able to grab during those years, right? So, I don't believe, I personally don't believe that a parent, even of a struggling student, is doing something that they believe that will actually harm their student. They may not always give their best effort, but I don't think they're intentionally doing anything to harm their child because they genuinely do love their child. They just may be at a loss, like Tamara was sharing, like, hey, I don't know what to do. I don't think that conversation is had enough personally, or that they feel connected enough to an adult in the school building to be able to be transparent enough to share that they're at a loss. So I think providing more opportunities for parents to come in the building for like from a non-punitive lens is going to be important because, everybody wants to experience success, right? And I think providing an opportunity to do that from a positive lens will create a lot more buy-in and a lot more just interest. So that's one. And then also as a dean, I was able to support a school. My first year as a dean, I had 226 suspensions, some of them long-term, right? 45-day suspensions, going down to the court building on, what's that, Indiana or something like that, downtown. Yep, going to sit in the courtroom, justify why I'm giving a 11-year-old 45 days. Over 90% of them I had granted, right? And that's just because of my documentation and involving all parties throughout the process before we got there, right? But then our second year, we had 24 suspensions. So from 226 to 24, all right? Now, I attribute that to two things. Number one, it takes some time to culture set a building, right? It takes an extremely focused set of school leaders who have committed to what they call non-negotiables, right? Regardless of what we're presented with, these are the spaces that we're not willing to negotiate, right? What we're not going to negotiate is that this is going to be a safe environment all the time. Anybody that violates that, they're gonna feel the wrath, right? And I don't mean like in a way that is completely negative, but we're gonna utilize all the resources that our district allows us to be able to really deter that behavior. All right. So safety and attendance, right? We can't support you if you're not here. We're also gonna make sure that we max out and overdo the attendance process to make you extremely comfortable. If you're not sending your student to school consistently, or you are, and then they're kind of leaving, and highlighting that reality. But I think it also comes from a school providing a valuable education experience, right? One that you can actually see the difference between, if I send my student here, they're gonna become a certain type of student versus if they go to another school. That's huge. All parents want their child in a school that they believe will produce a better product, right? How do you know that? There's a different feeling when you walk in the front door to register your student into a school building where there's students in the building. It's completely calm, under control. It's a welcome environment. Adults don't look like they're running around like a chicken with their head cut off. everyone seems and gives you the impression, and you can feel the truth of this being a stable learning environment. And then you continue to prove that reality throughout the time that that a student is there through frequent communication, hopefully coming with praise first, then opportunities to support, and ending with praise again, right? That is a strategic relationship that you establish with families in order for that experience to be valued. Now, that's important because that's what you actually leverage during the time that a student is not following the expectations. What I don't want to do, miss, is have to ask you or your child to leave our school community, because I understand how important it is for your student to be here. We want them here too. But if when you came in to register your student into this school, if every student was acting the way that your student was acting, would you have registered your child here? And 9 out of 10 times, the answer is no. Absolutely not. I'm sitting here having a conversation with you because your student won't respond to verbal redirection when they're off task. If you came into a walkthrough and all the kids was off task, would you sign your kid up to be in school here? Probably not. If all of them walked out the classroom without a
Yeah, they're killing us today. They're killing us today. But let's wrap it up. So all in all, I think all of our message is to control what we can control, because nothing's changing until we change it. So if you're a parent of a kid, learn about the school system, learn how to parent better, read some books, go to some counseling, do the things we can do to get better, because inside the building, it's crazy. It's really, really crazy. And it's going to be up to us to change things. I feel like we need another episode of this because it was so much things to unpack. So maybe we'll get back to that soon. But have a great week. Appreciate y'all.